So I'd like to welcome you to another of our lessons in Genesis. We're getting near the end. This week we're in week 24. We have approximately 3 to go, and I hope you've been getting a lot out of it. This week we're going to look at Genesis chapters 24 and 25 and kind of take a look at Abraham as a matchmaker and what he goes about to do in finding a wife for Isaac and why that's important. It tells us a lot about Abraham, and it certainly will tell us a lot about Isaac's future wife. So with that, if you have your lesson printed from the website, we're in lesson 24, and let's just have a look question by question at material today and see what we can learn. So the first question was, as Abraham grew old, where was he living, and how had it affected his walk with God? And so Abraham's been on the earth a long time now, and we've studied for several weeks the area that he was living in around Hebron. And it's significant that he lived there a long time, and we need to know how that's affected him. And so if we look in Genesis 24, 1 through 4, it says that now Abraham was old, advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, "Please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a bride for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live. But you will go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac." So the first observation we can make here is that even though Abraham was blessed in every way, and had lived here many, many years in the land of the Canaanites, he had not adopted or been influenced in any way by their lifestyle, their culture, their traditions, none of that. And he wanted to make sure that Isaac's wife wouldn't be either. And so this is why he sent his servant back to his homeland, and in fact back to his brother, to find a wife for his son Isaac. As I point out in the lesson, this is certainly a good illustration for us as well. How many of us, if we lived in a foreign land, or even have moved to a new town or city, have been tempted to pick up the ways of that area? And clearly, if you were living overseas somewhere in completely foreign land to yourself, it's tempting to want to fit in and to adopt the ways of wherever you happen to be living. But Abraham was true to his walk with God and did not do that in the land of Canaan. And so our second question was clearly Abraham did not want Isaac to be influenced by a foreign Canaanite wife, so he gave his servant Eliezer specific instructions regarding where to go and who to seek out as a source for Isaac's wife. He wanted his servant to go to Abraham's own country, and once he got there, he was to seek out an appropriate source for the bride. And why was this important? And as I stated in the lesson, Abraham wanted it to come from his own relatives, his own family, his own culture, his own background. He was not going to trust this really important role. Remember, all of Abraham's descendants are going to come through Isaac. He was not about to trust this important role to a Canaanite. So my third question then was, when Abraham's servant asked what to do if the woman would not come with him, which was an intelligent question on the part of Eliezer, what was Abraham's response, and what does it show us about Abraham's relationship with God? And so we'll read here in a moment what his servant's response is, and then we need to consider how Abraham answered him. So his servant said to him in verse 5, "Suppose the woman is not willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? So if the woman won't come to Isaac, should I take Isaac back there?" And then Abraham said to him, "Beware that you do not take my son back there." And he was quite emphatic about it. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, 'To your descendants I will give this land,'" where he was currently living, "he will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there." And so the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter. And so we can see from these verses Abraham was quite concerned. God had pulled him out And he understood the need to be drawn apart, to be in the world but not of it, in the land of Canaan, just as Christ calls us out to live in this world but not to be a part of it in the sense that it compromises our walk with Christ. And he didn't want that for Isaac. He wanted his descendants to be called out as well, and was quite specific that no way was Isaac going back there, that the bride would come from there to where Isaac was. And then we go on from there, that plus, as I point out in the lesson, the other thing is, it shows us Abraham's great faith in all of this. God had promised him his descendants would come from Isaac. We looked at last week when he was asked to sacrifice his son. He believed even if he sacrificed his son, God would still provide those descendants through Isaac. So this is a very, very important matter to Abraham, and it again illustrates the great faith that he had in God to keep his promises. And because of that faith, look at how Abraham lived. If our faith was as strong in God that he would keep his promises concerning us and our salvation, then we would live like Abraham did. We would live a life of it demonstrated a strong faith in everything that we do. So then question 4, when Abraham's servant, the one that he sent to find a wife for Isaac, who was also a follower of God, was Abraham's servant, the servant just of Abraham, or was he also a follower of God? And we can see in Genesis 24, 10 through 14, the influence that Abraham's having even on his servants. And so in Genesis 10, then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master and set out with a variety of good things of his master's in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And we know from our studies, I don't have a map today, but Mesopotamia is that big stretch of fertile land going sort of across the top of what most people refer to as the Middle East. And it brushes up against Turkey and comes down in through Iran, Iraq, and so on, where Abraham is down in the almost southern part, now living in Hebron, south of Jerusalem. So he's sending his servant north and then across the Mesopotamian, along the Chaldeans, of course, up in where his brother's living, probably near Haran. In this case, it's the city of Nahor. He made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at every time, evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. He said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. So notice that he's outside the city and he's at the well, and notice it's the women who have to come and draw the water. And so he's there with his camels now, and he's praying about this mission that Abraham has sent him to. And he says, O God, the Lord of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also, may she be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac, and by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. And so the code here is that not only will he get to drink, but she'll water the camels as well. What it demonstrates is that the servant is praying to God, and that the servant is praying for success for his master, Abraham. And it shows us the influence, of course, that Abraham has had on his household, on his servants. His great faith and his walk with God has been a testimony to all those around him. And clearly, his servant Eliezer here is also a believer. In question 5, as the servant is finishing his prayer, God answers it. Following his encounter with Rebekah, what does the servant do next? And now we're going to go down to verse 15 and see what happens. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Micah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had relations with her, and she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please let me drink a little water from your jar. And she said, drink, my lord, and she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. Now when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. Meanwhile, the man was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half a shekel and 2 bracelets for her wrists weighing 10 shekels in gold, and said, Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house? She said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And again she said to him, We have plenty of both straw and feed and room to lodge in. Then the man bowed low and worshipped the Lord. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brother. And so what a nice response, again demonstrating his faith. He realizes immediately that A, Rebekah is the one chosen for Isaac, and B, that it's all God's doing. And so he immediately gives God the credit. And I wonder sometimes how many of us have burdens or prayers or needs on our heart that God provides for us, and then we forget to thank him. We get so caught up in the answered prayer or whatever it happens to be that God's done for us that we forget to thank him, that we forget that all things come to him for us, they come from him to us. And I think sometimes we can find ourselves guilty of taking God for granted. But clearly in this case, Abraham's servant was immediate in his response, seeing God's hand in all of it, and praised him right away. So, question 6, the servant's response to God answering his prayer is witnessed by Rebekah. And what does she do, and how does her family react? And what does this tell us about the importance of our own testimony when we are in a strange place or with people that we don't know? And so let's see what Rebekah and her family, how they react to the same thing. So we're in verse 28 now. Then the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. When he saw the ring and bracelets on his sister's wrists, and when he heard the words of Rebekah his sister, saying, This is what the man said to me, he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring, and he said, Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I have prepared the house and a place for the camels? And so clearly here again we see they recognize God in this, as does Abraham's servant. And I wrote down 2 things in response to this question. First, Rebekah sees the servant praising God for his answered prayer. So she saw him at the well doing this and realizes that he's come for her. And she reports back to her family that a follower of God working for a relative, Abraham, was led to this place by God. And we can see that her brother realizes the significance of this in his statement to the servant, You are blessed by the Lord. And second, without meaning to, the servant's prayer, worship, and praise were a testimony to the family of Rebekah that he indeed was a follower of God and was seeking God's will. This shows us that even when we don't think people are noticing our actions, that our actions speak louder sometimes than our words. When he was there praying and thanking God for answering his prayer that he found Rebekah at the well, that's all he was focused on. But others around saw that behavior and recognized it for what it was, and that was a testimony in and of itself. And many times our actions, as the phrase goes, speak louder than words. And as Christians, sometimes I think we forget that just living day to day for Christ sends a message to those around us, even those who don't know him. Then question 7 was, how is Rebekah related to Abraham? And we go down to verse 46 now. And we read, She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I will water your camels also. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. And then I asked her, and she said, Whose daughter are you? And she said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her wrist. And I bowed low and worshipped the Lord, and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. And so we kind of mapped this out last week in class, if you see that video. We were trying to figure out, to be honest, I can't remember if it's a cousin or however it works out, but basically Abraham's brother had a son who had daughters, and Rebekah's one of those daughters. So it's all in the family, if you will. She's not a Canaanite or a Hittite or any other of that area in the day. She's definitely a direct descendant from the same father of Abraham and Nahor. How do Laban and Bethuel react to the servant's story? I mean, here they are. Suddenly somebody's coming out of nowhere to take their daughter, take Rebekah away from them. How do they react? And we can see that in following verses beginning in 49. So now, if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, let me know that I may turn to the right hand or the left. So this is the servant asking, are you going to allow me to take Rebekah? Then Laban and Bethuel replied, the matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you bad or good. Here is Rebekah before you, take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. And so they knew right away this was all God's doing. Who were they to say right, wrong, or otherwise? If it's God's will, then let's accomplish God's will and allow Rebekah to go. And a lot of times I think as Christians, we need to have that sense that when something is God's will, we recognize it immediately as that and take action based on it, rather than sort of struggling and debating and, well, maybe that's right, maybe it's not. It was clear here that it was God's will, and they wanted him to take Rebekah and go. Just go. So then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night, and when they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. But her brother and her mother said, let the girl stay a few days, say 10 days. Afterwards she may go. And he said to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. And they said, we will call the girl and consult with her wishes. Yeah, it is interesting, too, how many of us have had children, and there comes a time when it's time for them to move out. You're partly anxious for that to happen, and partly you don't want it to happen. And, of course, here we see that as well. The servant, his men, Rebekah, and her nurse, then returned to the land where Abraham and Isaac are living. And then one evening, Rebekah sees Isaac in a field. Why was Isaac in that field on a particular evening? And so let's go down. We'll read 55 through 65. But her brother and her mother said, let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10, and afterwards she may go. But he said, as we said earlier, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. And they said, we will call the girl and consult with her wishes. And when they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. And thus they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men. And so now they're headed back to south of Jerusalem, the Oaks of Mamre, Hebron, that area where Abraham was. They blessed Rebekah and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. Then Rebekah arose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now Isaac had come from going to Beer-lahai-roi, for he was living in the Negev, which would be even further south than Hebron. Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward the evening, and he lifted up his eyes, and look, and behold, and camels were coming. And so Isaac had a practice each evening to go out into the fields and meditate. One of the things I think in today's society we're lacking is time to reflect, time for prayer, quiet time. You think about the hectic pace we have today. And the number of things that distract us from having a really intense relationship with God, an intimate relationship with God. There were just too many distractions. We're in too much of a rush to do everything. In those days, particularly with the shepherds, they had time. And he would take the time each evening to go into the field, to be alone, and to meditate to pray. And this is where he was the evening he sees the camels coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. And she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into her mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And so Isaac was in the field, he was doing meditation, and the next question I had then was, he marries Rebekah, and how old was Isaac when he married Rebekah? And I'll give you some verses to look up. He was 40. And in fact, again, we talked a little bit about this in class last week. It talks about him finally being comforted from his mother's death, and we did the math on those verses. And Sarah was 127 when she died. That would have, since she was 90 when she had Isaac, that would have made Isaac 37. So he's been mourning the loss of his mother for 3 years and is now married at the age of 40. And then Rebekah was barren when she married Isaac, and he prayed to the Lord for her. How long did he pray? And so we want to go over and have a look at that. So we go over to verse 25, 21. Let me, my electronic tool here. Let's go over to 25 verse 21. Well, in fact, let's start with verse 19. Now, these are the records of the generations of Isaac. And one of the things that you'll note, I mentioned it last week again, is that Abraham now will slowly go into the background, and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph will now become more prominent as the book of Genesis goes on. Now, these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord answered him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And then it says, but the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is so, why am I this way? And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And of course she's pregnant now with the twins. Many people read that and they think, isn't it sweet, she was barren, Isaac prayed, she had baby. They don't realize how long and faithful Isaac was in that prayer for his wife to have a child. And so that was why I asked the question, how long did he pray? And if we look over in Genesis, so we know that he was 40 when he got married, and now we're going to go down to verses 22 through 26. I've read 22 already. 23, the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body. And one people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And of course he's talking about Esau and Jacob. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth red, all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. And afterwards his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. And so they were 40 when they got married. Isaac prayed for 20 years for Rebekah to have a child. 20 years he faithfully prayed for her. And then the next question was, after Sarah's death in a period of mourning by Abraham, did he remarry, and did he have other offspring beside Ishmael and Isaac? And clearly we see that in the beginning of chapter 25. And so let's go back to the beginning for a few verses, because he did as well. Now Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore to him Zimran and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shuah. Joksan became the father of Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Shumaran and Letzim and Lumim. I'm probably not pronouncing them correctly. The sons of Midian were Ephah and Ephner and Hannah and Abadai and Eldah. All these were the sons of Keturah. Now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. So he didn't even want those sons interfacing or interfering with God's plan with Isaac, and sent them off to the east. which would have been probably Jordan or beyond from where he was living. So yes, he remarried, he had a wife, and continued to have more children for quite a while after that. And then I finally, question 13, when Abraham died at the age of 175, how did he structure his estate between Ishmael, Isaac, and the children that he had with Keturah? And remember, Abraham would have had an enormous estate. He's certainly one of the wealthiest people in the Middle East at the time. So how did he structure this? So we read from verses 5 through 10. A little bit of that we've already read, and we'll start again, though. Now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living and sent them away to the east. These are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died at a ripe old age, an old man, and satisfied with life, and he was gathered to his people. Then his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave at Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, facing Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. It came about after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived by Beer-lahai-roi. And then it goes on to tell you about the descendants of Ishmael. And so what we see is, you have to remember that what we're talking about coming together here is Isaac and Ishmael, who had been separated. Remember, Ishmael had been driven out of the camp. But over Abraham's death, they reunited, and apparently peacefully from what we see here, and buried Abraham in the same grave that Sarah was in. But Isaac ended up getting the sort of the bulk of the inheritance, if you will. It all got passed down to Isaac. Gifts went to the others. And then finally, our last question. Following Abraham's death, Isaac lives in Beer-lahai-roi between his family and that of Ishmael. What is their relationship like? So we continue to read, beginning in verse 11. It came about after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived by Beer-lahai-roi. Now these are the records of the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, who Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn, and Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Numa, and Massa, Hadad, and Tema, Jator, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their camps, 12 princes, according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt, as one goes towards Assyria. He settled in defiance of all of his relatives. And so, even though they got along fairly well, it appears, Isaac remained in what we today call Israel, but he remained in Canaan, and Ishmael went out to the east of that, past Egypt. So they lived apart, but apparently in peace while they were still both alive. It's interesting how we can see many parallels in the life of Abraham. The deception carries on through the family line, the difficulty having children, being barren, those sorts of things. Clearly, having herds and flocks and things will play a key story all the way through until the time of Joseph. A lot of similarities. The biggest single similarity, however, is that in Abraham's case, his descendants, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, all were followers of God and inherited the promise originally given to Abraham. And so we'll look closer at those over the next couple of weeks as we begin to kind of wrap up our study in Genesis. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and look forward to seeing you next week.